The wind on Virel 9 did not just blow. It screamed. It was a constant physical weight against the reinforced plasteel walls of the outpost, an unending roar that sounded like the planet itself was dying and wanted everyone else to die with it. Jace sat at his workbench, the magnetic spanner in his hand trembling slightly. Not from the cold, but from the vibration of the station's atmospheric scrubbers fighting a losing battle against the ice. He was a man composed of sharp angles and grease stains, 35 years of bad decisions etched into the corners of his eyes. He tightened the coupling on the fuel regulator he was rebuilding, his knuckles white. This was the edge of the map. The human frontier ended 3 sectors back. Out here, there was only the ice, the mining guilds who paid too little, and the silence that filled the space between the winds howling. He preferred the silence. It asked no questions. It required no apologies for the things he had done during the corporate wars, the fires he had set, the people he had failed to save. Here, his only job was to keep the fuel tanks liquid and the landing pad clear for the erratic freighters that dropped out of warp looking for a top-up before vanishing into the dark. A proximity alarm cut through the ambient drone of the station. Jace frowned, setting the spanner down on the scarred metal table. It was the deep, rhythmic pulse of the long-range sensor array. He stood up, his knee joints popping, and walked to the main console. The screen was awash of static, bleeding green and gray interference lines. The weather outside was deteriorating. A Category 4 ion blizzard was hammering the northern hemisphere, the kind of storm that stripped shielding off hulls and scrambled avionics into nonsense. He tapped the screen, trying to filter the noise. There, a ghost of a signal. It was not a scheduled freighter. The transponder code was garbled, oscillating between frequencies that human ships did not use. It was erratic, dropping in altitude too fast, way too fast. "Command, this is Outpost 4 Alpha," Jace said into the headset, his voice raspy from disuse. "I am picking up a distress vector in Sector 7. Do you copy?" Static hissed back at him. The storm had already chewed up the orbital relay. He was alone. He watched the blip on the screen. It was not gliding. It was falling. The telemetry lines crossed, merged, and then vanished abruptly into the white topographic grid of the Razor Peaks, a jagged mountain range 200 kilometers north. Jace stared at the empty spot on the screen. The smart thing to do was log the coordinates, wait for the storm to break in 3 days, and send a salvage drone. That was the protocol. That was the safe play. Going out into a Category 4 storm in a sub-atmospheric skimmer was suicide. He looked at his reflection in the dark monitor. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had survived everything except himself. If he stayed, whoever was in that ship would freeze to death within the hour. The ambient temperature out there was 60 degrees below zero and dropping. "Damn it," Jace whispered. He turned and grabbed his thermal suit from the locker. He pulled the heavy insulated polymer weave over his legs, sealing the magnetic clasps. He shrugged into the jacket, the internal heating coils humming to life as he checked the charge. He grabbed his breather mask, a med kit, and a heavy-duty plasma cutter. 10 minutes later, he was in the cockpit of the station's battered skimmer, a boxy, ugly craft that was more engine than fuselage. The hangar doors groaned open, revealing a wall of white, swirling violence. Jace gunned the thrusters. The skimmer lurched forward, and the storm swallowed him whole. Flying the skimmer was like trying to thread a needle while riding a jackhammer. The wind slammed into the craft from all sides, tossing it 50 feet up and then smashing it down toward the jagged ice spires below. The cockpit was freezing, the heater unable to keep up with the heat loss through the canopy. Jace fought the stick with both hands. His teeth clenched so hard his jaw ached. The proximity sensors were useless, blinded by the ionization in the snow. He was flying on instinct and the faint dying pulse of the crashed ship's emergency beacon. Visuals were zero. He was staring into a void of churning gray and white. Lightning, purple and green from the atmospheric ionization, flashed in the clouds, illuminating the terrifying shapes of mountains rushing past his wings. Distance to target, 5 kilometers. The nav computer droned, its voice distorted. "Hold together." "You piece of junk," Jace growled, slamming a warning light on the dashboard with his fist until it flickered off. The signal spiked, right below him. He cut the thrusters, deploying the air brakes. The wind caught them and tore at the frame, metal screaming in protest. The skimmer dropped like a stone. Jace flared the engines at the last second, the repulsors kicking up a cloud of snow and ice shards. The landing skids hit hard. The impact threw him against the harness, knocking the wind out of him. The skimmer slid sideways, grinding against rock before coming to a halt in a snowbank. Silence returned, save for the howling wind outside. Jace unbuckled, checking the seal on his mask. He grabbed the survival pack and kicked the canopy release. It blew open with a hiss, and the cold hit him like a physical blow, a hammer of ice that seemed to freeze the moisture in his eyes instantly. He climbed out, sinking to his knees in the drift. He activated his shoulder lamps, beams of halogen light cutting through the swirling madness. The crash site was 100 yards ahead. It was not a human ship. The vessel was sleek, teardrop-shaped, made of a dark, iridescent alloy that seemed to ripple even in the stillness. It had plowed a deep furrow into the glacier, snapping one of its elegant wings. The hull was breached, a dark gash venting purple vapor into the white storm. Jace lowered his head and pushed forward. The wind tried to knock him down with every step. He trudged through the snow, his breath rasping loudly in his own ears. He reached the hull. It was freezing to the touch, the metal lifeless. He climbed up the side, finding the emergency release for the cockpit. It was fused shut. "Stand back," he muttered to no one. He fired the plasma cutter. The blue flame roared, slicing through the alien alloy. Molten metal dripped onto the ice, hissing. He kicked the plate in, and it fell with a clang. Jace dropped into the cockpit. The interior was dim, lit only by failing emergency strobes that pulsed a slow, rhythmic amber. The air inside was brutally cold, the life support dead. There were 2 pilots, or rather, a pilot and a passenger. They were slumped in the acceleration couches, held in place by webbed harnesses. Jace shined his light on them and stopped, his breath catching in his throat. They were humanoid, but clearly not human. Their skin had a faint, silvery sheen, like moonlight on water. Their hair was stark white, floating slightly in the zero gravity of the crash before settling as the ship died. He moved to the first one. She was tall, her features sharp and regal, even unconscious. She looked imposing, along her high cheekbones and down the side of her neck. Faint bioluminescent markings pulsed with a weak, blue light. She was breathing, but barely, shallow, ragged gasps. The second one was smaller, curled into a ball in her seat. Her hair was shot through with streaks of violet. She looked younger, softer, her face buried in the collar of her flight suit. Jace checked the tall one's pulse at the neck. Her skin was like ice. "Hey," he barked, shaking her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" The woman's eyes fluttered open. They were solid violet, no whites, terrifying and beautiful. She looked at him, confused, her pupils blowing wide in the darkness. "Report," she whispered. Her voice was a dry croak, but the tone was pure command. "Status report." "You crashed," Jace said, his voice loud over the wind howling through the hole in the hull. "You are freezing to death. I need to get you out." She tried to move, to lift her hand to a console that was no longer there, but her arm flopped uselessly. "My sister," she slurred. "Nessa, secure her." "I have got you both," Jace said. He cut the harness. She was heavier than she looked, dense with muscle. He hauled her up, her head lolling against his shoulder. He dragged her to the airlock he had cut, pushing her up and out onto the wing. "Stay there," he yelled, though he knew she could not hear him over the storm. He went back for the younger one. Nessa. She was shivering violently, a full-body convulsion that rattled her teeth. When he cut her harness, she didn't issue orders. She latched onto him. Her arms locked around his neck in a death grip, her face pressing into the thermal fabric of his suit. "I have you," Jace grunted, lifting her. He carried her out. The storm had intensified. Visibility was down to the end of his nose. He had to make 2 trips. He could not carry both of them through this snow. He secured Nessa in the skimmer's cargo net, wrapping her in an emergency blanket. She whimpered when he let go, her hand grasping at the air. "I will be right back," he promised. He fought his way back to the wreck. The tall one, Lyra, had tried to crawl. She had made it 3 feet before collapsing face first into the snow. Jace cursed, scooped her up, and slogged back to the skimmer. His legs burned. The cold was seeping through his suit now, biting at his extremities. He shoved Lyra into the passenger seat next to him and scrambled into the pilot's chair. He slammed the canopy shut, sealing out the roar of the wind. The silence of the cockpit was deafening. "Hang on," Jace said. He punched the ignition. The engines coughed, whined, and then roared to life. He spun the skimmer around and gunned it toward the outpost, racing the frost that was creeping across his visuals. The return trip was a blur of adrenaline and fear. By the time Jace dragged them into the outpost's airlock and cycled the pressure, his own hands were shaking so bad he could barely work the controls. The inner door hissed open, warm. Stale air washed over them. Jace didn't stop. He carried them, one by one, into the main living quarters. It was a small room, dominated by a single bunk and a kitchenette. He laid them both on the floor on top of the synthetic rug, and they were blue. Not their natural silver, but the deep, bruised blue of profound hypothermia. Their breathing was dangerously slow. Jace ripped his mask off and threw it aside. He knelt beside them. Their flight suits were soaked with coolant from the crash and melted snow. If he left them in the wet gear, they would die before their cores warmed up. "I am sorry about this," he muttered. He worked quickly, clinical and detached, though his heart hammered against his ribs. He stripped the wet suits off them. The alien physiology was remarkably, distractingly similar to human, yet different. Their skin was smoother, poreless, and cool to the touch like polished stone. The bioluminescent markings on the tall one, Lyra, traced geometric patterns down her spine and ribs. The younger one, Nessa, had them swirling around her wrists and ankles. He left them in their thin underlayers, stripping those only down to the waist to remove the freezing moisture. He pulled the thermal blankets from the emergency locker, but he knew it wasn't enough. The station's heater was struggling against the storm outside. The ambient temperature in the room was hovering just above freezing. He needed to share heat. It was the survival manual's first rule for deep hypothermia. Jace stripped off his own heavy outer gear, down to his thermal shirt and trousers. He grabbed the heavy insulated heat tarp, a massive sheet of reflective polymer meant for survival on the ice. He dragged the mattress off the bunk and onto the floor. It was wider than the frame. He laid Lyra down on her side, then positioned himself behind her. He pulled Nessa against his chest, sandwiching himself between the 2 alien women. He pulled the tarp over the 3 of them, tucking the edges in tight to trap every BTU of heat they generated. It was an overload of sensation. Nessa, the younger one, was pressed against his front. She was small, soft curves and sharp shivering. Her back was against his chest, her head tucked under his chin. He could smell her, a scent like ozone and crushed mint, sharp and clean. Lyra was against his back. She was longer, leaner, hard muscle and rigid tension even in unconsciousness. Her skin felt like marble that had been left in the snow. Jace lay there, staring at the dark ceiling of the outpost, his arms wrapped around Nessa to hold her still against the shivering. He focused on his breathing. In, out, in, out. He tried not to think about the curve of Nessa's hip against his thigh, or the way Lyra's breathing hitched and synchronized with his own. This is survival, he told himself. This is just mechanics, thermodynamics, heat transfer. But his pulse was thumping in his neck, and he knew they could feel it. Time lost its meaning in the dark warmth of the tarp. It might have been an hour, maybe 3. The violent shivering slowly subsided. The breathing of the women deepened, becoming less ragged. Jace dozed, floating in a haze of exhaustion. He woke to the feeling of movement. Nessa was shifting against him. She turned in his arms, her face inches from his in the gloom under the tarp. Her eyes were open. They were large, dark, and filled with a terrifying intelligence. She blinked, looking at him, then down at his arm wrapped around her waist, then at her sister pressed against his back. A slow, lazy smirk spread across her purple lips. "Is this typical human courtship?" she whispered, her voice husky. "Or did we skip straight to the consummation?" Jace scrambled backward so fast he nearly tangled himself in the tarp. He sat up, the cold air of the room hitting his flushed face. "No," he stammered. No. It was hypothermia. You were freezing. I was stabilizing your core temperatures. It is a standard emergency protocol." He realized he was babbling. He also realized he was wearing very little, and they were wearing less. He grabbed the edge of the tarp and yanked it up to his chin, looking anywhere but at them. Nessa laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gale. She sat up, letting the tarp pool around her waist, unconcerned by her state of undress. She stretched, her spine cracking audibly. "You turn a brilliant shade of red. Human," she noted, tilting her head. Silence. A sharp voice cut through the air from behind Jace. "Nessa, cover yourself. You are shaming the house." Lyra was sitting up. She moved stiffly, pain etched on her face, but she pulled the thermal blanket around her shoulders with the dignity of a queen adjusting her robes. She glared at Jace, her violet eyes hard and assessing. "Jace," he said, pointing to himself. "My name is Jace. I pulled you out of the wreck." Lyra stared at him for a long beat. Then she nodded, a singular, sharp motion. "I am Lyra. This is my sister, Nessa. You saved our lives. The House of Vane owes you a debt." She looked around the cramped, greasy room. "Secure the facility," she ordered. "Excuse me," Jace said, bristling slightly. "Shut down your external comms," Lyra said, her voice rising in urgency. "Lock the airlock manually. Kill the transponder." "Why?" Jace asked. "Because we did not just crash," Lyra said, her gaze cold. "We were shot down." Jace went still. "By who?" "Mercenaries," Nessa answered, her playful tone gone. She wrapped her arms around her knees, looking suddenly very young. "They are paid by the Synthetics Corporation. And by our own uncle." Jace stood up, ignoring the awkwardness of his attire, and walked to the console. He punched in the sequence to sever the uplink. The room went quiet as the hum of the transmitter died. "You brought a corporate war to my doorstep," Jace said, turning back to them. We brought the truth, Nessa said softly. Lyra tried to stand, but her legs gave out. Jace moved instinctively to catch her, but she held up a hand, stopping him. She pulled herself up using the edge of the bunk, her face gray with pain. We carry a data core, Lyra said. It contains the full text of the Treaty of Kylar. The official version says it brings peace. The real version, the one we stole, outlines the planned sacrifice of 12 border colonies, human and alien alike, to incite a controlled conflict. Jace felt a cold pit open in his stomach. He knew about the border tensions. He knew entire moons had gone dark recently. They want a war, Jace said. They want profit, Lyra corrected, and power. If they find us, they will kill us, and they will kill you for seeing us. We need to get to the starport, Nessa said. We have a contact there, a secure uplink. The starport is 300 kilometers south, Jace said. Through the storm, in a crawler that barely runs. Then we had better start fixing it, Lyra said. She took a step and winced, clutching her left hand. Let me see that, Jace said. He stepped forward, ignoring her flinch, and took her hand in his. Her fingers were long, elegant, and blackened at the tips. Frostbite. Lyra stiffened as his rough, calloused thumb brushed over her knuckles. She looked at his hand, then up at his face. Her expression was unreadable, confusion perhaps, or shock. She was clearly used to being obeyed, feared, or worshipped. She was not used to being touched with care. This is going to hurt when the feeling comes back, Jace said quietly. He rubbed her palm gently, trying to stimulate circulation without damaging the tissue. Lyra didn't pull away. She watched him, her breathing shallow. For a moment, the room felt very small. The sound of the wind outside faded. There was just the heat of his hand on hers, and the strange alien texture of her skin. She relaxed, just a fraction, leaning almost imperceptibly toward him. Jace looked up and locked eyes with her. The intensity of her gaze pinned him to the spot. It was not gratitude. It was something more primal, something that made his mouth go dry. A loud, exaggerated sigh broke the moment. Oh, honestly, Nessa groaned. She wedged herself between them, breaking their grip. She looked at Lyra, then at Jace, rolling her eyes. If you two are going to stare into each other's souls, at least do it after we have had food. I am starving. Lyra snatched her hand back, her face darkening. Nessa. Jace stepped back, clearing his throat. I have ration bars and coffee. It is terrible, but it is hot. Night on Virel 9 lasted 20 hours. The storm was still raging outside, shaking the outpost's foundations. The power fluctuations had started an hour ago. The generator was choking on ice in the intake. Jace had rerouted everything to life support and the perimeter heaters, killing the lights in the main room. They sat in the dark, illuminated only by the red glow of the emergency strips and the soft, rhythmic pulsing of the sisters' bioluminescence. There was only one heated bunk. The floor was freezing now that the tarp was gone. We have to share, Nessa stated, looking at the narrow bed. I will take the chair, Jace said. You will freeze, Lyra said. We need to conserve body heat. It is logical. Jace looked at the bunk. It was a single. It was going to be a tight fit. Fine, he said. They arranged themselves with the awkwardness of strangers forced into intimacy. Jace took the middle again. It was the only way to balance the heat. He lay on his back, stiff as a board. Nessa curled up on his left, draping her arm over his chest immediately. She rested her head on his shoulder, her hair tickling his neck. Lyra lay on his right, facing away from him, her back pressed against his side. The silence was heavy. So, Nessa whispered, her voice vibrating against Jace's ribs. In human mating rituals, is the male always this rigid? Nessa, Lyra hissed from the dark. Go to sleep. I am just asking, Nessa murmured. I have read that humans are quite possessive, monogamous. Is that true? Jace, do you only bond with one mate at a time? Jace stared at the ceiling. Usually, he said, his voice tight. How boring. Nessa sighed. Her hand moved slightly on his chest, her fingers tracing the line of his collarbone. Among our people, bonding is more fluid. Energy is shared. Touch is language. She shifted her leg, hooking it over his. Jace stopped breathing for a second. Stop taunting him, Lyra said. Her voice was low, but it lacked its usual bite. She shifted slightly, pressing her back firmer against Jace's side. He could feel the heat radiating off her. I am not taunting, Nessa whispered. I am investigating. She lifted her head, looking at Jace in the dark. Her face was illuminated by the markings on her own skin. She looked dangerous and wild. You saved us, Jace, she whispered. That creates a bond. Can you feel it? Jace could feel a lot of things. He could feel the softness of her, the hardness of Lyra, the confusing mix of fear and adrenaline and undeniable attraction that was making his head spin. Go to sleep, Nessa, Jace said, closing his eyes. She chuckled, a low, throaty sound, and settled back down. Lyra didn't say a word, but as Jace drifted toward an uneasy sleep, he felt Lyra's hand move in the darkness. She found his hand where it rested on the mattress, and her fingers laced through his. She squeezed, once, hard, a silent anchor in the storm, and didn't let go. Outside, the wind screamed, but inside, the air was electric. Dawn broke over Virel 9 not with the warmth of a rising sun, but with a sullen, bruising shift from black to gray. The storm had downgraded from a Category 4 hurricane to a relentless, grinding gale that scoured the ice sheets and buried the horizon in diamond dust. Inside the outpost, the mood was brittle. Jay stood by the viewport, a mug of bitter black coffee in his hand, watching the white chaos outside. His reflection in the reinforced glass looked haggard. He had not slept after the sisters had drifted off. He had spent the remaining hours of the night watching the sensor grid, waiting for the red blips of a search party to bleed onto his screen. Behind him, the sounds of movement signaled the end of the uneasy truce the night had imposed. We cannot stay here, Lyra said. Jace turned. She was standing by the central console, studying the topographic map he had brought up on the display. She had cleaned the grease from her face and tied her white hair back with a strip of cloth torn from her flight suit. Even in the oversized mechanic's coveralls he had lent her, which swallowed her frame and were rolled up at the cuffs, she looked like she was addressing a war council. They will triangulate the crash site within 6 hours, she continued, her finger tracing a line across the glowing grid. Once they find the shuttle, they will widen the search radius. Your outpost is the only heat signature in a 50-kilometer radius. If we are here when they arrive, we are dead. Jace took a sip of coffee, the liquid scalding his throat. Leaving is a breach of contract. Lyra, the corporation owns this station. If I abandon it, they wipe my credits. They blacklist me. I will never fly in this sector again. Lyra looked up, her violet eyes cool and unyielding. If you stay, there will be no sector left to fly in. The treaty we carry prevents a war that will burn this frontier to ash. Your contract will hardly matter when this moon is glassed by orbital bombardment. It was a cold, mathematical argument, delivered with the precision of a hammer strike. But it was not what made Jace hesitate. He looked past her to where Nessa was sitting on the edge of the bunk, pulling on a pair of heavy thermal boots he had dug out of storage. She looked up, catching his eye. She did not look like a galactic diplomat or a political pawn. She looked like a girl who had almost died in the snow and was now grinning at the absurdity of being alive. "We could always steal a ship," Nessa suggested, struggling with the laces. "Become pirates. I think I would make an excellent pirate queen. You could be my first mate, Jace. You have the brooding look for it." She winked. It was a terrifyingly fearless gesture given their situation. Jace looked back at Lyra. She was not smiling, but her chin was lifted, a silent challenge. She was asking him to throw away the only stability he had managed to claw back from a life of mistakes. She was asking him to risk execution for two strangers who had fallen out of the sky. And God help him, he knew he was going to do it. "Pack the thermal packs," Jace said, setting his mug down with a heavy thud. "We take the crawler. The starport is 300 kilometers south. If we push the engine, we can make it in 12 hours. Lyra's shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, the only sign of relief she allowed herself. "Good. We leave in 10 minutes. The crawler was a beast of a machine, a rusted 8-wheeled behemoth built for deep ice mining. It smelled of diesel, ozone, and old sweat. The cab was cramped, designed for 2 large miners or 3 very uncomfortable people. Jace sat in the driver's seat, wrestling the heavy control yoke as the crawler chewed its way up a steep incline of blue ice. The suspension groaned, a metallic symphony of protest that vibrated through the floor plates. Lyra sat in the navigator's seat to his right, her eyes scanning the passive radar, calling out ice fractures and wind shears. Nessa was wedged on the bench seat behind them, leaning forward between their shoulders, her chin resting on her crossed arms. The landscape of Virel 9 was a nightmare of beauty. Massive spires of frozen methane jutted from the glacier like broken teeth, reaching hundreds of feet into the swirling gray sky. The wind whipped the snow into towering devils that danced across the plains. "So," Nessa said, her voice raising over the roar of the engine, "since we have 12 hours of intimacy ahead of us, Jace, tell me, what is your preference?" Jace kept his eyes on the ice. "My preference is not driving into a crevasse." "You are dodging," Nessa said, her tone teasing. "I saw the way you looked at Lyra when you were fixing her hand. And I certainly felt the way you held me under the tarp. So, purely for cultural exchange purposes, do you prefer dominant or submissive partners?" Jace choked on his own breath. He jerked the yoke to the left to avoid a rock that wasn't there, sending the crawler slewing sideways. The tracks shrieked as they fought for grip, the heavy vehicle drifting dangerously close to a drop-off before Jace corrected the slide. "Nessa!" Lyra snapped, gripping the dashboard. "Cease this immediately, now you are distracting the operator. I am asking a valid question," Nessa countered, unbothered as the vehicle stabilized. "Human social dynamics are fascinating. Is it true the male has to perform a series of escalating financial gestures before copulation is permitted?" Jace felt the heat rising up his neck, burning the tips of his ears. "It is not that simple," he muttered, checking the rearview monitor. "And we are not talking about this." "Why not?" Nessa asked. "We might die today. I would hate to die ignorant of your desires." "Because it is private," Jace said through gritted teeth. "Privacy," Nessa mused, testing the word. A strange concept. Among the vain, we know what our partners feel. We do not need to ask. As she spoke, the view outside the reinforced windshield shifted. The gray clouds above them suddenly rippled with color, A band of aurora borealis, usually a rare sight this low in the atmosphere, flared into existence. But it was not the standard green. It was a vibrant, pulsing pink, swirling with streaks of amusement gold. Jace stared at it. The lights were moving in sync with the rhythm of Nessa's voice. When she laughed, a soft, throaty sound, the pink flared brighter, casting a rose-colored glow over the snow. "What is that?" Jace asked, pointing at the sky. Lyra glanced up, then back at the sensors. Bioenergetic resonance. Our physiology is attuned to electromagnetic fields. Virel 9 has a highly unstable magnetosphere. It seems to be reacting to us. "Reacting to you," Jace repeated. "You mean the planet is a mood ring?" Nessa laughed again, and the sky bloomed with violet light. "Essentially," Lyra said dryly, "it is a disadvantage. Stealth is difficult when the atmosphere broadcasts your emotional state. Nessa, control yourself. You are lighting us up like a beacon." "I cannot help it," Nessa said, leaning closer to Jace's ear. "He is so easily flustered. The colors like him." Jace focused grimly on the driving, trying to ignore the fact that the sky was literally blushing because an alien princess was flirting with him. 4 hours later, they reached Outpost Delta 3, a grim automated supply station hunkered down in the lee of a massive ridge. It was little more than a fuel depot and a general store for independent miners. But Jace needed to top off the crawler's coolant reserves if they were going to make the city. "Stay here," Jace ordered, pulling his heavy scarf up over his nose and mouth. "Keep the engine idling. If you see anything that isn't me, you drive. You do not wait." Lyra nodded, sliding into the driver's seat as he grabbed his gear. Jace stepped out into the biting wind. The cold found the gaps in his armor immediately. He trudged toward the main building, the snow crunching loudly under his boots. The station's interior was dim, smelling of stale coffee and ozone. A few rough-looking miners were huddled around a heating unit in the corner, playing cards. Jace kept his head down, moving to the automated kiosk to purchase the coolant. As the machine whirred, processing his credits, the airlock cycled open behind him. A silence fell over the room. It was the kind of silence that happened when predators walked in. Jace glanced at the reflection in the kiosk's screen. 3 men had entered. They were not miners. They wore matte black combat armor with no insignias, and they carried high-grade pulse rifles slung across their chests. Their movements were synchronized, professional. Mercenaries. Jace's hand drifted toward the concealed pistol at his belt. One of the mercenaries, a scarred human with a cybernetic eye, walked up to the shopkeeper, a bored drone in a cage. "We are looking for a shuttle crash," the mercenary said. His voice was a gravel grinder. "Sector 7, 2 survivors, non-human females, silver skin." The shopkeeper shrugged. "Storm's been bad. Haven't seen nothing flying." The mercenary leaned in. "There is a 5 million credit bounty for their recovery. Alive is preferred. Dead is acceptable. 5 million. You sure you haven't seen anything?" Jace froze. 5 million credits. That was enough to buy a moon. It was enough to make every desperate soul on Virel 9 turn traitor. He grabbed the canister of coolant from the dispenser, trying to keep his movements fluid and casual. He turned, keeping his face hidden by the scarf, and walked toward the exit. "Hold up," the mercenary called out. Jace stopped. He didn't turn around. "You," the mercenary said, "you come in from the north. You see any smoke? Any wreckage?" Jace deepened his voice, roughening it with a cough. "Visibility is 0, he rasped. "Can't see my own hood ornament." The mercenary stared at his back for a long second. Then he grunted. "Get out of here." Jace walked out. He didn't run until he was around the corner of the building. Then he sprinted, sliding on the ice, his heart hammering against his ribs. He reached the crawler and slammed the hatch shut behind him. "Drive," he yelled. "Go. Now." Lyra didn't ask questions. She punched the throttle, and the crawler surged forward, throwing Jace into the rear compartment. "They know," Jace said, stripping off his scarf as he scrambled to the front. "There is a patrol back there, and there is a price on your heads. 5 million credits." Nessa let out a low whistle from the back. "Only 5. I am insulted. Father usually values me at least at 7. This is not a joke." "Nessa," Lyra said, her eyes glued to the radar. "If they are this far south, they are widening the net. We have to get off the main trade route." "Head for the ridge," Jace said, pointing to the jagged line of mountains to the east. "The terrain is rougher. They won't be able to track our heat signature as easily in the geothermal vents." The detour through the vents slowed them down, turning the journey into a grueling crawl over unstable rock and hissing steam geysers. By the time night fell, the crawler was running on fumes and the tension inside was thick enough to choke on. They pulled into a narrow crevasse to let the engine cool. The wind howled high above them, but down in the crack of the earth, it was eerily quiet. Jace went to the rear compartment to check the oxygen scrubbers. It was a tiny space, barely a closet with 2 fold-down bunks. Nessa followed him in. Jace turned to leave, but she blocked the doorway. In the dim light of the instrument panels, her eyes were luminous. "You are angry," she said softly. "I am not angry," Jace said, checking a gauge he had already checked 3 times. "I am focused." "You are afraid," she corrected. "Not for yourself. For us." She stepped closer. The space was so small that her knees brushed against his legs. "Jace, look at me." He looked up. She wasn't smiling now. Her face was open, vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. She reached up and touched the collar of his jacket, her fingers brushing the skin of his neck. "Among my people," she said, her voice a whisper. "We do not have casual intimacy. Touch is a transfer. It binds us. It allows us to feel what the other carries." She took his hand, her skin cool and smooth, and guided it to her collarbone. The bioluminescent marking there was pulsing with a soft, rhythmic blue light. "Touch it," she breathed. Jace hesitated. His heart was thumping so hard he was sure she could hear it. He let his fingers graze the glowing skin. It felt electric, a low-level hum that traveled up his arm and settled in his chest. Sudden, intense emotion washed over him, not his own. He felt a profound, crushing loneliness. He felt fear, sharp and biting, and beneath it all, a fierce, burning curiosity and a desire to be seen, truly seen, not as a title or a pawn, but as a person. It was Nessa. He was feeling Nessa. She gasped, her eyes fluttering shut, her head tilting back. "You feel it," she whispered. "You are stronger than I thought. Your mind, it is loud, so much guilt. Why do you carry so much guilt? Jace." She leaned in, her face inches from his. Her lips parted. The air between them crackled with static. The attraction wasn't just physical anymore, it was a psychic gravity, pulling him in. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to lose himself in that alien light and forget the cold and the mercenaries and the 5 million credits. She drew him closer, her hand sliding up to cup his jaw. Jace closed his eyes, leaning in. Then he stopped. He pulled back, gently but firmly catching her wrists. "No," he said, his voice rough. Nessa's eyes snapped open. Confusion clouded the desire. "You do not want me." "I do," Jace said, and the honesty of it made her pause. "I really do. But not like this. Not when you are running for your life. Not when you are scared and I am the only thing standing between you and a cage. He let go of her wrists, stepping back to give her space. That is not a choice, Nessa. That is desperation, and I won't take that from you. Nessa stared at him. The lights on her skin flared, not with the pink of amusement or the blue of desire, but with a steady, warm gold. She studied his face, searching for a lie and finding none. A slow smile spread across her face, not her usual teasing smirk, but something softer, something real. You are a very strange human. Jace, she said quietly. I am just a mechanic. He said, no. She said, you are not. She stepped aside, letting him pass. As he squeezed by her to get to the door, she didn't touch him, but he felt the warmth of her regard follow him out like a physical weight. Outside the crawler, the cold was absolute. The wind had died down, leaving a silence so deep it rang in the ears. The auroras were gone, leaving the sky a vast, starless void. Jace stood by the rear tracks, kicking a chunk of ice loose from the drive sprocket. He needed the cold. He needed to clear his head of the smell of ozone and mint. He heard the hatch cycle. He didn't turn. You should be resting, he said. We have 6 hours of driving left. Lyra walked around the side of the vehicle. She was wearing her flight jacket, hugging her arms against the chill. She stopped a few feet away, watching him work. Stay away from her. Jace. Jace straightened up, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. I beg your pardon. Nessa, Lyra said, her voice sharp as cracking ice. I saw the way she looked at you. I know my sister. She is impulsive. She seeks sensation to drown out her fear. She thinks she wants you. And you are deciding for her that she doesn't, Jace asked, his voice low. I am deciding that she cannot afford to be distracted, Lyra snapped. She is a highborn of House Vane. She carries state secret. And you. You are a variable we cannot calculate. A variable, Jace repeated. Is that what I am? You know what I mean, Lyra said, stepping closer, her eyes flashing. Do not play the innocent. You are a man who lives on the edge of the world because he has nowhere else to go. You are dangerous to her. I am the only reason she is breathing, Jace shot back, his temper finally snapping. I flew into a storm for you. I walked into a station full of killers for you. I just turned down 5 million credits for you. Do not talk to me about being dangerous. I did not ask you to do those things, Lyra shouted, her composure cracking. No, but you needed me to, Jace yelled back, and I did it. I risked everything. Not because I want a reward, and not because I want to use her, because it was the right thing to do. So do not stand there and treat me like a hired gun or a predator. I am a man, Lyra, and I am doing my best. The shout echoed off the ice walls, fading into the silence. Lyra stood frozen, her chest heaving. The anger drained out of her face, leaving behind a stark, terrifying exhaustion. Her mask crumbled. I know, she whispered. Her voice broke. I know you are. She looked down at her hands, the hands he had healed. I am responsible for her. Jace. She looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. If she falls, if she is hurt, it is my failure. I dragged her into this. I stole the data. I made us run. If the house falls, it is just politics. But if Nessa breaks, I cannot survive that. She looked so small suddenly, stripping away the royalty to reveal a terrified older sister. Jace stepped forward. The distance between them vanished. He didn't touch her. Not yet. But he invaded her space, offering his presence as a shield. You are not alone in this, he said softly. You do not have to carry her and the war and the guilt all by yourself. Lyra looked up at him. The wind whipped a strand of white hair across her face. She didn't brush it away. She stared at him as if she was seeing him for the first time. Not the mechanic, not the pilot, but the man. Her breath hitched. She swayed toward him. It wasn't the psychic pull he had felt with Nessa. This was gravity. It was the magnetic attraction of two people who understood the weight of duty and the crushing loneliness of survival. Jace. She breathed. She tilted her head up, her lips parted. Jace began to lower his head. The cold air vanished. The world narrowed down to the violet of her eyes and the curve of her mouth. A loud clank from the crawler's engine block shattered the moment. Lyra flinched back as if she had been burned. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The regal mask slammed back into place, though it was brittle now. We need to move, she stammered, stepping back. The engine is cooling too much. Get inside. She turned and fled back to the hatch, not looking back. Jay stood there for a moment in the cold, his heart pounding a different rhythm than before. He looked up at the sky. A single streak of deep, aching crimson cut through the darkness. The last leg of the journey was silent. Nessa slept in the back, or pretended to. Lyra stared out the window, her posture rigid. Jace drove, his eyes burning with fatigue. As dawn threatened the horizon again, the silhouette of the starport city, Borealis Prime, rose from the ice plains. It was usually a beacon of civilization, a sprawling cluster of domes and towers glowing with amber lights. But today, it was dark. Jace slowed the crawler as they crested the final ridge overlooking the valley. Look, he said, his voice dead. Lyra leaned forward. Nessa scrambled up from the back. In the center of the city, where the massive spire of the subspace uplink tower should have been, there was only a jagged stump of twisted metal and a rising column of black smoke. Fires burned in the district surrounding the base of the tower. Even from this distance, the ground trembled slightly with secondary explosions. They blew it, Jace said. Lyra stared at the destruction, her face pale. The conspirators. They knew. They knew we would run for the uplink. They are ahead of us, Nessa whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Jace gripped the steering yoke. The simple plan, get to the city, beam the data, get out, had just gone up in smoke. Literally. We can't go to the main entrance, Jace said, watching the flicker of security drones swarming the city perimeter like angry hornets. They will have a lockdown grid in place. Lyra looked at Jace. Her eyes were hard again, the vulnerability of the night before locked away deep inside. Then we find another way, she said. We did not come this far to freeze on the doorstep. Jace put the crawler into gear. He turned the wheel, steering them away from the main highway and down toward the shadowed industrial underbelly of the city's outskirts. Hold on, he said. This is going to get messy. Borealis Prime was burning, but not with fire. It was burning with fear. Jace navigated the snowcrawler through the labyrinthine alleyways of the lower industrial district, keeping to the shadows of the looming atmospheric processors. The city, usually a chaotic, vibrant hub of trade, had been strangled into silence. Above them, massive holographic projectors, usually reserved for advertising mining equipment or synth liquor, now dominated the skyline. They bathed the slush-filled streets in a harsh, blood-red light. A giant, translucent face of a Synthetics Corporation spokesperson hovered over the sector, her voice booming from public address speakers, distorted by the wind. Citizens of Borealis, remain indoors. The terrorist attack on the uplink tower has been confirmed as the work of rogue alien radicals. These extremists seek to destabilize the border. Report any suspicious non-human activity immediately. Security protocols are in effect. Nessa watched the screen from the back seat, her face illuminated by the red glare. Radicals, she spat, her voice trembling with anger. They blow up their own tower and call us the terrorists. It is a classic play, Lyra said from the passenger seat. She was scanning the street level, her eyes darting between shadows. Control the narrative. Control the populace. By the time the truth comes out, the fleet will already be mobilizing. Jace gripped the wheel tight. We need to get off the street. Even down here, the patrols are doubling. He turned the crawler down a narrow service ramp that led beneath the city's primary heat exchange pipes. This was the Undercity, a place where the sun never reached, and the air tasted like recycled coolant and rust. It was where people went when they did not want to be found. He pulled the vehicle into a derelict loading bay, killing the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. My contact is 2 levels down, Jace said, checking the charge on his pistol. His name is Rix. He is the best slicer in the sector, mostly because he is paranoid enough to keep his hardware off the grid. Can we trust him? Lyra asked, her hand resting on the hilt of a ceremonial dagger she had salvaged from the crash. I trust him, Jace said, which is more than I can say for anyone else on this moon right now. Rix's workshop was hidden behind the facade of a failed hydroponics laundry. Inside, it was a chaotic cave of disassembled drone parts, severed data cables, and towers of server racks humming with illegal processing power. Rix himself was a short, wiry man with oil-stained skin and an ocular implant that zoomed in and out with a soft mechanical whir. He stood behind a workbench, a plasma welder in one hand, staring at the 3 of them. He looked at Jace. He looked at Lyra, standing tall and imposing despite her mechanic's coveralls. He looked at Nessa, whose violet hair was damp with melted snow. Well, Rick said, pushing his goggles up onto his forehead. You do know how to make an entrance. Jace, we need a secure line. Rix, Jace said, cutting straight to the point. Off-planet, encrypted. Rix laughed, a dry, hacking sound, a secure line. Have you looked outside? The main uplink is a crater. The backup relays are locked down by synthetic security. You cannot even send a text message to the next block without a corporate clearance code right now. We have the codes, Lyra said, stepping forward. She pulled the data core from her inner pocket. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic blue light. And we have the data. We just need a way to push it out. Rix's cybernetic eye whirred as he focused on the core. That is Vane Tech, High Noble House. He looked back at Jace, a slow grin spreading across his face. Let me get this straight, Rix said, leaning back against a stack of hard drives. You disappear for 3 years to live like a hermit on an ice cube. You come back in the middle of a planetary lockdown, trailing corporate death squads. And you have got 2 high-born alien women with you. He shook his head, chuckling. You saved 2 alien sisters from freezing to death, Jace. Now both are fighting for your heart. It is like one of those trashy holonovels my grandmother watches. The silence in the room was absolute and excruciating. Jace felt his face heat up. Shut up, Rix. Nessa let out a sharp, surprised laugh, covering her mouth with her hand. Her eyes darted to Jace, sparkling with amusement. Lyra stiffened, her posture becoming even more rigid. That is entirely inappropriate, she said coldly. This is a political alliance born of necessity. Nothing more. Right, Rick said, winking at Jace. Political alliance. Got it. He grabbed the data core from Lyra's hand, inspecting it. Look, I can rig a transmitter, I have an old deep space heavy wave dish mothballed in the back, but I cannot power it here. The grid is monitored. If I spike the power usage to push this data through the interference, Synthetics will drop a tactical squad on my roof in 3 minutes. What do we need? Jace asked. Juice, Rick said. Raw, dirty power. There is an old maintenance hub about 2 kilometers from here. Deep in the sub-levels, it taps directly into the city's geothermal vent. If you can get me in there, I can hotwire the station's emergency beacon. It has its own independent power source. We can blast this data out on a wide-band frequency. Every news node, every ship, every listening post within 10 parsecs will hear it. Then that is the plan, Jace said. It will take me an hour to prep the decryption sequence, Rick said, turning to his console. Get comfortable. Try not to kill each other over the drama. The hour stretched out, tense and thick. The workshop was cramped. Rix worked maniacally at his console, muttering to himself. Jace sat on a crate near the door, cleaning his weapon. Nessa refused to sit still. She paced the room, touching things, asking Rick's questions he ignored, and circling back to Jace. She eventually settled on a crate next to him. Not on the crate next to him, practically on top of him. Her knee pressed firmly against his thigh. Do you think the mercenaries are close? She asked, leaning in. Jace shifted, trying to create distance without being rude. We lost the tail at the vents. We are safe for now. Safe is a relative term, Nessa murmured. She reached out, picking up a spare magazine for his pistol. She turned it over in her hands, her fingers brushing his as she set it back down. You are very tense. Jace, your cortisol levels are spiking. I can feel it. I am fine. Nessa. You are not, she countered. You are worried about the plan, and you are worried about Lyra. She glanced across the room. Lyra was standing by the window, peering through the blinds at the street. She stood alone, a statue of solitude. She is very good at being a statue, isn't she? Nessa said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She thinks if she stands still enough, the universe will stop trying to hurt us. She is trying to protect you, Jace said quietly. She is trying to control me, Nessa corrected. She thinks I am a child. She leaned closer, her shoulder pressing into his arm. She lowered her voice further, her tone turning playful but with a dark undercurrent. I am not a child. Jace, I know what I want. And I know you are not made of stone, even if you try to act like it. Jace looked at her. Her eyes were wide, searching his face. The air between them hummed, from across the room. Lyra turned. She saw them, Nessa leaning in, Jace's arm boxed in by her body. Lyra's expression did not change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. We should review the map, Lyra said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the moment like a blade. Nessa sighed, rolling her eyes, but she pulled back. Always the map, she muttered. Never the territory. 20 minutes later, Jace needed air. Or at least, he needed to be away from the stifling dynamic of the main room. He walked into the back storage room, a narrow space filled with dusty crates and the smell of ozone. He leaned against a workbench, rubbing his temples. Footsteps scuffed the floor behind him. He turned, expecting Nessa. It was Lyra. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest. The harsh overhead light cast deep shadows under her eyes. She looked exhausted, the regal facade wearing thin. Rick says the encryption is tricky, she said. He needs more time. Jace nodded. He is good. He will get it done. Lyra walked into the room, closing the door behind her. The sound of the latch clicking shut was loud in the small space. Why did you stay? Jace, she asked. The question caught him off guard. What? On Virel 9, she said. You are a skilled pilot. You can fix anything. You have combat reflexes. Men with your skill set do not spend 3 years freezing on a refueling rock unless they are running from something. Jace looked away, picking up a rusted servo motor from the bench. It is quiet. I like the quiet. Do not lie to me, Lyra said softly. He looked back at her. She was closer now. The bioluminescent markings on her cheekbones were glowing with a faint, steady pulse, not the erratic flashing of the storm, but a slow, rhythmic beat. I worked for synthetics, Jace said. The words tasted like ash. 5 years ago. I was a subcontractor for their security division. Escort missions, supply runs. He set the motor down. We were ordered to clear a settlement on a moon in the outer rim. Command said it was an illegal mining operation. Pirates, slavers. They told us to vent the atmosphere processors, flush them out. He looked at his hands. It wasn't pirates. It was a refugee colony, families, kids. By the time we realized the intel was fake, it was too late. The air was gone. Lyra stared at him. She did not recoil. She did not look at him with disgust. She took a step closer. I pulled the lever, Jace whispered. I did not know, but I pulled the lever. So I came here, where there is no one to hurt, where the cold keeps everything preserved, even the guilt. Lyra was standing right in front of him now. She reached out, her hand hovering for a moment before she placed it on his forearm. Her touch was hesitant, light as a feather. I signed the treaty, she said. Her voice was a fragile thing, barely a ghost of her command tone. The first draft, the one the conspirators wrote. They told me it would secure peace for the core worlds. They told me the border colonies were unstable, that they would fall anyway. They asked for my signature to authorize the withdrawal of protection fleets. She looked up at him, her violet eyes swimming with moisture. I thought I was being pragmatic. I thought I was saving billions by sacrificing thousands. It was logic, cold, hard logic. A tear escaped, tracking through the silver dust on her cheek. Then I saw the troop movements, she said. I saw that they were not withdrawing. They were positioning for a slaughter. I was not saving peace. I was authorizing a massacre. So I stole the core, and I ran. We are the same, Jace said. He realized his heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a profound aching recognition. We are both running from the ghosts we made. We cannot run anymore, Lyra whispered. She looked at him, and for the first time, she wasn't the highborn lady, and he wasn't the mechanic. They were just two broken people standing in the dark. Jace lifted his hand, slowly, giving her every chance to back away. He reached out. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, tracing the line of the glowing marking. Her skin was warm. The light under her skin flared at his touch, brightening from a pale blue to a deep, intense indigo. Her breath hitched. She leaned into his hand, her eyes fluttering shut. The connection was immediate and terrifying. He felt her exhaustion. He felt her crushing weight of responsibility. And beneath it, he felt a desperate, starving need to be held, to be forgiven. Jace, she breathed. She opened her eyes. They were dark with desire. She tilted her face up. Jace leaned in. The world narrowed down to the pulse of light on her skin and the scent of her, snow and static. The door banged open. So, Rick says, Nessa stood in the doorway. Jace jumped back as if he had been shot. Lyra spun around, her hands flying to smooth her coveralls, her face flushing a deep, violet hue. Nessa froze. She looked at Jace, breathless and flushed. She looked at Lyra, who was refusing to meet her eyes. She looked at the lack of space between them. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Nessa's expression crumbled for a split second, hurt, raw and open, before she plastered a bright, brittle smile onto her face. "Oh," she said, her voice too loud, too cheerful. "I see. Strategic alliances are being solidified. My apologies. I did not realize the negotiation table was so intimate." "Nessa," Lyra started, stepping forward. "It is not—" "No, no!" Nessa waved a hand, backing out of the room. "Do not mind me. I am just the little sister. I will go count the rivets in the wall. You two carry on saving the galaxy." She turned and vanished into the main room. Jace looked at Lyra. The moment was shattered. The intimacy had evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp guilt. Lyra straightened her spine, her face hardened back into the mask of the diplomat. "We should check on Rix," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She walked past him, leaving him alone in the storage room. Night had fully fallen over the city. Rix was sleeping in his chair, the decryption program running a final cycle. Lyra was sitting in the corner, eyes closed, meditating, or pretending to. Jace climbed the ladder to the workshop's roof access. He needed the cold. The air inside was suffocating him. He stepped out onto the flat roof. The snow was falling harder now, obscuring the neon glare of the city below. He walked to the edge, leaning against the parapet, watching the patrol drones buzz in the distance like angry fireflies. "You are brooding again." He didn't turn. "Nessa." She climbed out of the hatch, the wind whipping her hair around her face. She wasn't wearing a jacket. The cold didn't seem to bother her, or she was too angry to feel it. She walked up to him, standing uncomfortably close. She didn't look at the city. She looked at him. "Did you choose her?" Nessa asked. Her voice was flat, dangerous. Jace sighed, rubbing his face. "Nessa, it is not about choosing. We are in the middle of a war zone. Do not give me that," she snapped. "You were going to kiss her. I felt it. The energy in that room was strong enough to power a starship." "It was a moment," Jace said. "We were talking about the past, about why we are here. And you think I do not have a past," she challenged. "You think I do not have ghosts." "I know you do," Jace said gently. "No, you don't," she said, stepping into his space. She placed her hands on his chest, gripping the lapels of his jacket. "You think I am just the impulsive little sister, the one who needs protecting, the one who flirts to get attention." She looked up at him, her eyes burning with gold fire. "I was the one who found the data, Jace. Lyra signed the treaty. I was the one who broke into the archives and found the proof. I dragged her out of the palace. I flew the shuttle. But Lyra gets the command. Lyra gets the respect. And apparently, Lyra gets the guy." "I haven't chosen anyone," Jace said, covering her hands with his own. "I am not a prize, Nessa, and I am not going to be the thing that tears you two apart." "You are already tearing us apart," she whispered. "Because you see her, you listen to her pain. But when I look at you, you just see a child." She pressed her forehead against his. The contact sent a shockwave through him. "I am not a child," she hissed. "I am a vain highborn. My emotions are a weapon. My empathy is a sense you cannot even comprehend. I can feel your heart beating. Jace, I can feel how torn you are. You want her stability, but you want my fire." Jace's breath caught. She was right. He was terrified of how much he wanted her fire. "I am not a child," she repeated, her voice breaking. "Stop treating me like one." She leaned back, looking up at him with a raw, desperate challenge. Jace stared at her. He saw the strength in her jaw, the fierceness in her eyes. He realized, with a jolt, that she was the one holding them together. Lyra was the shield, but Nessa was the engine. "I see you." "Nessa," he said hoarsely. "I swear, I see you." The air around them crackled. The auroras above the clouds flared with a sudden, intense burst of gold and violet. Before either of them could move, a deafening explosion rocked the building. Jace was thrown against the parapet. The roof access hatch blew open in a shower of sparks. "Mercenaries!" Jace roared, grabbing Nessa and pulling her down behind a ventilation unit. Below them, the workshop erupted in chaos. The sound of pulse fire tore through the floorboards. "Rix!" Nessa screamed. Jace kicked the hatch open and dropped down the ladder, his pistol drawn. Nessa followed, moving with a fluid, terrifying grace. The workshop was a war zone. The front door had been blown off its hinges. 5 mercenaries in heavy combat armor were swarming the room. Rix was on the ground behind his console, clutching his shoulder. Blood was pooling on the floor. Lyra was in the center of the room, moving like a blur of silver and white. She had lost her coveralls and was fighting in her underlayer, wielding the ceremonial dagger and a heavy wrench she must have grabbed from a table. She ducked under a pulse blast, slammed the wrench into a mercenary's knee, and spun, driving the hilt of the dagger into his helmet's vocalizer. Jace hit the floor firing. He took out the mercenary near the door with 2 shots to the chest plate, knocking him back. "Cover Lyra!" Jace yelled to Nessa. He sprinted toward Rix, sliding behind the console as bolts of plasma chewed up the metal around him. "Rix, move!" Jace grabbed the technician by his good arm. They found the signal. Rix gasped, his face gray. They tracked the decryption spike. "The drive! Get the drive!" Jace grabbed the data core from the console. Across the room, Lyra was backed into a corner by 2 massive mercenaries. She was fast, but they were heavy. One of them backhanded her, sending her crashing into a shelf of spare parts. "No!" Nessa screamed. She didn't run to her sister. She stood in the center of the room, threw her arms wide, and screamed, but it wasn't a sound, that it was a psychic shockwave. The air in the room rippled. The bioluminescent markings on Nessa's skin flared blinding white. Jace felt it hit him, a wave of pure, distilled terror. It wasn't his terror. It was an echo. The mercenaries froze. They dropped their weapons, clutching their heads, screaming. They were drowning in a sudden, overwhelming hallucination of their own worst fears. One man curled into a ball, sobbing. Another fired blindly at the wall, shouting about spiders. Nessa collapsed, her energy spent. "Move!" Lyra yelled, scrambling up. She grabbed Nessa, hauling her to her feet. Jace hoisted Rix up. Out the back, into the tunnels. They scrambled through the rear exit, dragging the wounded technician into the freezing alleyway just as the workshop exploded behind them. A grenade had gone off in the ammo cache. They ran. They didn't stop running until they were 3 blocks away, huddled in the entrance of a sealed sewer overflow. Rick slid down the wall, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He looked at the burning skyline. "Well," he wheezed, managing a weak smile. "There goes my deposit." Jace checked the street. Sirens were wailing everywhere. Above them, a drone swept the alley with a spotlight. He looked up at a holographic billboard across the street. The image had changed. It was no longer the generic warning. It was their faces: Jace, Lyra, and Nessa. High-resolution scans. Wanted. Terrorist cell. The text scrolled in bold red letters. Armed and extremely dangerous. Bounty. 10 million credits. 10 million, Nessa whispered, staring at her own face. They doubled it. "We have no workshop," Lyra said, her voice steady but her hands shaking. "We have no transmitter, and every bounty hunter on the planet is looking for us." Jace looked at the data core in his hand. It was safe, but it was useless if they couldn't send it. "We still have the plan," Jace said darkly. Rix looked up. "The maintenance hub." "It is the only way," Jace said. "We break into the hub. We hijack the emergency beacon. We send the signal. It is a fortress," Rix warned. "Corporate security will be guarding it." "Then we take the fortress," Lyra said. She looked at Nessa, then at Jace. Her eyes were hard as diamonds. "We do not run anymore. We finish this." Jace nodded. He looked at Nessa. She was pale, leaning against the wall, but she nodded back. The fire was still there. "Let's go start a revolution," Jace said. The undercity of Borealis Prime was not built for the living. It was a digestive tract for the metropolis above, a labyrinth of dripping pipes, rusted catwalks, and service tunnels that smelled of copper, rot, and ancient chemical coolant. Jace led the way, holding a datapad with Rix's stolen schematics illuminated in low-light mode. His boots splashed through ankle-deep sludge that shimmered with an oily, iridescent sheen. Behind him, Lyra and Nessa followed, their breathing loud in the oppressive silence of the tunnels. "We are walking in circles," Nessa whispered, her voice bouncing off the damp concrete walls. "Rix's map is garbage. We have passed that same dripping valve 3 times. "We are following the thermal gradient," Lyra corrected, her tone clipped and sharp. "If you were paying attention to the schematics instead of staring at the back of Jace's head, you would see that we are descending 2 degrees with every junction." "I am watching our rear flank," Nessa snapped back. "Unlike you, I do not need to micromanage the path to feel useful." Jace stopped, closing his eyes for a brief second. The tension between the sisters had been thickening for the last hour, hanging in the air heavier than the humidity. It was not just fear of the mercenaries hunting them. It was something older, a bitter root that had been pulled from the soil and exposed to the cold light of their desperate situation. He kept walking. "Watch your step," he said, his voice echoing slightly. "The floor grating is corroded here." The environment around them was changing. As they went deeper, the industrial gray of the tunnels gave way to something wilder. Strange. Bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls and ceiling, leftovers from the planet's early aggressive terraforming attempts that had retreated into the dark warmth of the sewers. The fungi were large, bulbous growths that pulsed with a soft, spectral light, and they were reacting. As Lyra walked past a cluster of mossy tendrils, the light shifted from a dull green to a sharp, anxious violet. When Nessa followed, the same patch flared into a jagged, chaotic orange. "They are feeding on us," Nessa murmured, reaching out to brush a fingertip against a glowing pod. The light snapped at her finger like a static shock. "Not our bodies. Our nerves. They like the taste of adrenaline." "Do not touch them," Lyra ordered. "We do not know if they are toxic. Everything is toxic to you." "Lyra," Nessa muttered. "Fun is toxic. Risk is toxic. Love is toxic." Lyra stopped dead in the sludge. She turned slowly, the faint light from the fungi casting long, distorted shadows across her face. "Do not presume to lecture me on love. Nessa, you treat affection like a game. You throw yourself at him because you are bored and terrified, and you want a distraction. You do not care about the consequences for him, and you do." Nessa shot back, stepping closer. The water splashed around her boots. "You are just as obsessed with him as I am. But you wrap it up in duty and logic so you do not have to admit that for once in your life. You want something that isn't yours by right of birth." Jace felt the air in the tunnel shift. The fungi on the walls suddenly flared bright white, reacting to the spike in emotional voltage. The hum of the bioluminescence grew louder, a buzzing that vibrated in his teeth. "Stop it," Jace said, not turning around. "He is not a toy," Lyra hissed, ignoring him. "He is a man who has lost everything to help us. And you are playing with him to prove you are grown up. And you are using him to prove you are not a cold-hearted statue," Nessa shouted. The tunnel exploded with light. The fungi were blazing now, illuminating the grime on the walls, the sweat on their faces, and the raw, ugly hurt in their eyes. "Enough!" Jace spun around, his voice roaring over the hum of the alien moss. The sound slammed into the sisters, silencing them instantly. He stood in the center of the tunnel, chest heaving, his hands balled into fists at his sides. He looked at Lyra, then at Nessa. "I am right here," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, shaking whisper. "I am standing right here. I am not a trophy. I am not a prize at a fairground. And I am certainly not a tool for you to work out 20 years of family dysfunction." He took a step toward them. The fungi pulsed in time with his heartbeat, a slow, heavy thrum of deep red. "You think this is a game?" Jace asked, looking at Nessa. "You think this is a strategy meeting? Lyra, we are being hunted by a death squad. Rix is bleeding out somewhere in the dark because of us. And you two are standing in the sewer fighting over who gets to claim the pilot." He ran a hand through his hair, smearing grease across his forehead. "I care about you," he said. The admission hung in the damp air. He looked at Nessa. "I care that you are brave enough to laugh when the world is ending." He looked at Lyra. "I care that you are strong enough to hold the sky up when it is falling." He looked between them. "But watching you tear each other apart, watching you turn that love into a weapon, it makes me feel like the worst version of myself. If I am the wedge driving you apart, then I will walk away. I will get you to the hub, and I will leave. I will not be the reason you destroy each other." The silence that followed was total. Even the fungi seemed to dim, the light fading to a soft, apologetic blue. Nessa looked down at the water. Lyra looked at the wall. "We need to rest," Jace said, his voice flat. "There is a maintenance chamber ahead. We stop, we cool off, and then we finish this." The chamber was a small, cube-shaped room off the main tunnel, filled with the hum of a ventilation cycler. It was dry, at least. Jace sat on a metal crate, cleaning the mud from his pistol. Lyra and Nessa sat on the floor against the opposite wall, their knees drawn up. The red emergency lighting cast them all in a bloody, intimate glow. The silence had lasted for 20 minutes. It was Nessa who broke it. "I always followed you," she whispered. She didn't look at Lyra. She stared at her boots. "When we were children," Nessa said, "you walked so fast, in the palace corridors, in the gardens. I had to run to keep up. I was always 3 steps behind, breathless, just trying to see what you were seeing." Lyra shifted, her shoulder brushing against the wall. "I walked fast because I was afraid," she said softly. "Afraid of what?" Nessa asked. "You were the heir. You were perfect. Afraid that if I looked back I would see you falling," Lyra said, "and I would not be able to catch you." She turned her head, looking at her younger sister. Her expression was cracked, the regal mask gone. "Father told me, on the day you were born, that you were my burden." Lyra confessed. "He did not say you were my sister. He said you were my responsibility. If you failed, it was because I did not teach you. If you were hurt, it was because I did not protect you. I have spent my entire life trying to sculpt the world into a shape that would not cut you." Nessa looked up, tears streaking the dirt on her face. "But you never asked me if I wanted to be protected, and you just built a cage and called it safety." I did not know how to do anything else, Lyra whispered. Jace stopped cleaning his gun. He watched them, his heart aching. He saw the invisible wires that bound them, love twisted by duty, loyalty warped by fear. He stood up and walked over to them. He didn't say anything. He just sat down on the floor, sliding into the space between the crate and the wall, forming a triangle with them. Their knees were almost touching in the cramped space. Nessa reached out. Her hand was shaking. She didn't grab his arm or try to be seductive. She just laid her palm open on the floor between them. Jace looked at it. Then he looked at Lyra. Lyra's gaze was soft, unfocused, shimmering with tears. She gave a microscopic nod. Jace placed his hand on Nessa's. Her fingers curled around his instantly, gripping hard. A moment later, Lyra reached out and placed her hand on top of theirs. The reaction was immediate. The air in the chamber hummed. The dust motes floating in the red light suddenly ignited, swirling like microscopic stars. The metal walls seemed to vibrate. It wasn't just biology. It was something deeper. The bioenergetic field of the sisters was resonating with Jace, amplifying through the connection. He felt a rush of emotion that wasn't his. Nessa's fiery need for validation, Lyra's crushing weight of duty, and a shared, overwhelming sense of relief that they were finally, truly touching. It was dizzying. It was intoxicating. For a moment, the boundaries between them dissolved. Jace looked at them, and he didn't see two aliens and a human. He saw a potential future, a future where he didn't have to choose between fire and ice, where they didn't have to choose between duty and freedom, a future where they could build something new, something that defied the rigid geometries of their cultures. He wanted to lean in. He wanted to kiss Nessa's trembling mouth and then Lyra's soft lips. He wanted to lose himself in this strange, beautiful resonance. But he couldn't. Not yet. Jace gently pulled his hand from the pile, breaking the circuit. The swirling dust settled. The hum faded. Both sisters looked at him, their eyes wide and dark with desire and confusion. "We can't," Jace said quietly. "Why?" Nessa whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You felt it. I know you felt it. I did," Jace said. "And that is why we can't. Not here. Not like this." He looked at them, his gaze steady and serious. "If we do this now, it is trauma bonding. It is adrenaline and fear and the fact that we might die in an hour. I won't let you make a choice that you might regret when the sun comes up. I won't be a mistake you have to live with." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "We make a pact," Jace said. "No decisions, no declarations, not until the data is sent. Not until we are safe, when we are free. When you are free to walk away from me. Then we decide." Lyra looked at him, studying his face with a mixture of frustration and profound respect. "You are a stubborn man." "Jace, I am a careful man," he countered. "And you two are worth being careful with." Nessa let out a long, shaky breath. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Fine. A pact. But when we survive this, Jace, all bets are off." "I am counting on it," he said, and for the first time in hours, a genuine smile touched his lips. They moved on. The tunnel widened, eventually opening into a massive, cavernous space, an underground reservoir that fed the city's old filtration systems. The water was black and still as oil, stretching out into the darkness. They stopped to check the map. Lyra walked to the edge of the water. She stood there, staring into the abyss. Jace walked up beside her. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough that their arms brushed with every breath. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible over the distant drip of water. "For what?" Jace asked. For stopping us, she said. For seeing the cage. She looked at him. The bioluminescent markings on her neck were glowing with a steady, calm blue light. I have never wanted anything for myself. Jace, my life has been a series of strategic moves. Marriages arranged for alliances, careers chosen for optics. Even my rebellion was calculated. She turned to face him fully. If we live through this, I want to try. I want to try to want something just because it makes me happy. Just because it makes my heart beat faster. Even if it is messy. Even if it is illogical. Jace held her gaze. You deserve that, Lyra. More than anyone I know. She looked at his mouth, then up to his eyes. She didn't move, but the promise was there, hanging between them like a held breath. 100 meters down the path. The walkway narrowed. Jace took the lead, scanning for security drones. Nessa fell into step beside him. She slipped her hand into the crook of his arm. It wasn't a flirtatious gesture this time. It was the way a person holds onto a lifeline. She leaned her head against his shoulder as they walked. I was terrified in the snow, she whispered. Jace glanced down at her. When I found you. No, she said. Before that, when the shuttle went down, I thought I was going to die a footnote in Lyra's biography. Here lies Nessa, sister of the air. She squeezed his arm. When you pulled me out, when you held me under that tarp, it wasn't just heat. You looked at me. You talked to me. You made me feel like I was the main character in my own story, even just for a minute. She looked up at him, her eyes shining in the gloom. I do not care about the rules. Jace, I do not care about bloodlines or treaties. I just want to feel like that again. Safe and seen. Jace covered her hand with his own. You are the main character, Nessa. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. The fungi on the ceiling above them pulsed with a soft, golden warmth as they passed, trailing them like a benediction. The maintenance hub was not the abandoned closet Rix had described. It was a fortress. They crouched on a high catwalk, looking down into the main chamber. The hub was a massive circular room dominated by a central pillar, the emergency beacon array, but the floor was gone. The entire lower level was flooded with a sickly, neon green liquid, coolant, toxic, freezing, and corrosive, and it was guarded. 3 automated sentry turrets were mounted on the walls, their laser sights sweeping the room in lazy grids. 2 corporate security drones hovered near the ceiling, scanning for movement. Jace lowered his binoculars. Rix's intel was old, he whispered. The cooling system has breached. The manual override is underwater. Lyra pointed to a sealed hatch near the ceiling on the far side. That is the control room. If we can get in there, we can activate the beacon. But the door is mag-locked. We need to trip the manual release at the base of the pillar. The base that is underwater, Nessa noted dryly, and covered by turrets. Jace added. They pulled back into the shadows to regroup. I can do it, Nessa said. Jace looked at her. No. It is toxic coolant. My suit is hermetically sealed, Nessa argued. And I can hold my breath longer than a human. My species. We have aquatic ancestry. It is why our skin shimmers. I can swim the ducts from the lower intake. I can pop up right next to the pillar, trip the release, and dive back down before the turrets lock on. It is too dangerous, Jace said. It is the only way, Lyra said. She looked at Nessa, her face pale but resolved. She looked at her sister not as a child to be protected, but as a soldier. Can you make the swim? Nessa? Lyra asked. Nessa grinned, though her lips were trembling slightly. I am a vein. We are born in the water. Just keep those turrets off me. We will draw their fire, Jace said. We will trigger a distraction at the main entrance. Make them look up while you go low. The plan went wrong in 30 seconds. Jace and Lyra blew the blast door at the top of the catwalk. The explosion shook the room, sending dust raining down. Hey, Jace yelled, firing a flare across the room. The turrets swiveled instantly. Red laser lines converged on their position. The drones shrieked and dove. Move! Jace grabbed Lyra and they sprinted along the catwalk. Plasma bolts chewed up the grating behind them. Sparks showered down like fireworks. Below, in the glowing green sludge, a ripple moved toward the central pillar. Nessa was in the coolant. Jace fired blindly over his shoulder, taking out one of the drones. The second drone strafed them, forcing them to dive behind a heavy generator unit. Lyra popped up, firing her pistol with surprising accuracy. She hit a turret, blowing its sensor array, but the other two were relentless. I need to draw them left, Lyra yelled over the roar of weapons fire. Nessa needs clear water. Before Jace could stop her, Lyra vaulted over the generator. She didn't run for cover. She ran into the open, firing both hands, pistol in one, a flare gun she had taken from Jace in the other. Lyra! Jace screamed. She was a blur of motion, drawing every gun in the room. A plasma bolt grazed her shoulder, spinning her around. But she kept moving, sliding across the ice-slicked metal to the far side of the room. The turrets tracked her. Below, Nessa surfaced. She gasped for air, her skin burning from the cold, and slammed her hand onto the manual override lever at the base of the pillar. She hauled it down with a primal scream of effort. Clank. The mag locks on the control room door disengaged. Alert. Manual override detected. The system droned. The turret spun back toward the pillar, toward Nessa. Nessa dove. Laser fire boiled the coolant where she had been a fraction of a second before. Jace broke from cover. He saw Lyra slumped against the railing, clutching her shoulder. He saw the coolant churning where Nessa had vanished. He raised his weapon and fired a precise, desperate shot at the power coupling on the wall. The conduit exploded, plunging the room into semi-darkness and confusing the turret's targeting sensors. Go! Jace roared, sprinting to Lyra. He hauled her up. She hissed in pain, her flight suit scorched. I am fine, she gritted out. Get to the room. They scrambled up the ladder to the control room, tumbling inside just as the drones recovered and strafed the doorway. Jace slammed the heavy steel door and engaged the lock. Silence. Jace ran to the window. He looked down at the pool of green slime. Nessa, he yelled into his comms. Nessa, report. Nothing. The liquid was still. Jace's heart stopped. He gripped the sill, his knuckles white. Please, please not like this. A hand slapped onto the grating of the lower walkway. Then another. Nessa hauled herself out of the pool. She was covered in slime, coughing violently, her violet hair plastered to her skull. She gave a shaky thumbs up to the control room window. Jace let out a breath that felt like it took a year off his life. Lyra slumped against the console, closing her eyes in relief. Jace turned to the terminal. He jacked in the data core. Okay, he said, his fingers flying across the keys. Rix's patch is running. We are bypassing the local firewalls, accessing the emergency beacon, now. The screen lit up. A progress bar appeared. Connection established. Broadcasting in 3, 2, 1. The bar turned red. Error. Transmission blocked. What? Jace stared at the screen. He typed furiously. Rerouting. Trying secondary frequency. Error. Signal jammed at source. Lyra dragged herself to the console, clutching her wounded shoulder. What is it? They anticipated the beacon, she said, her voice hollow. Look at the diagnostic. Jace looked. The signal wasn't leaving the atmosphere. It was being intercepted by a hardline block. The relay, Jace said, realizing the horror of it. The emergency beacon doesn't transmit directly to deep space. It relays through the orbital station. The Helios station, Lyra whispered. Synthetics command. The very people we are trying to expose control the only switch that can let the truth out, Jace said. He slammed his fist onto the metal desk. We are trapped, Lyra said. We are in a sealed room, surrounded by security, with a data core we cannot send. Jace looked at the screen, then out the window at the dark city. He looked at Lyra, wounded and exhausted. He thought of Nessa, shivering on the walkway below. We are not trapped, Jace said slowly, a cold, desperate plan forming in his mind. He turned to Lyra. The beacon connects to the station. Right. It is a hardline data link. Yes, Lyra said. So, Jace said. If we cannot send the data through the station, we go to the station. You mean physically? Lyra asked, her eyes widening. They have a prisoner transport shuttle docking in an hour to pick up terrorist detainees. Jace said, I heard it on the security band. He looked at her. We surrender. Lyra. We let them take us. We get on that shuttle. We get inside the beast, and we blow it apart from the inside. Lyra stared at him. It was madness. It was suicide. It was their only chance. Call Nessa up here, Lyra said, straightening her posture, ignoring the pain in her shoulder. We have a flight to catch. The prisoner transport shuttle smelled of sweat and ionized metal. Jace sat strapped into a magnetic restraint chair, his wrists locked behind his back in heavy plasteel cuffs. Across the narrow aisle, Lyra and Nessa sat in identical restraints, their silver skin looking dull and gray under the harsh transport lights. They had not spoken since the surrender in the maintenance hub. The plan was a fragile thing, built on a bluff and a prayer. They had called the security team, hands raised, offering the data core as a bargaining chip. But Jace had kept the encryption key memorized, the physical drive now just a useless brick of crystal without the sequence locked in his brain. The shuttle shuddered as it engaged the docking clamps of Helios Station. Jace looked at Lyra. She was staring straight ahead, her face a mask of stone. But Jace saw the tremor in her jaw. She was terrified, not for herself but for the gamble she was taking with her sister's life. The airlock hissed open. Move! A mercenary barked, striking Jace in the shoulder with the butt of a rifle. They were marched out onto the flight deck of the orbital station. It was a cavernous hangar, bustling with refueling drones and armed patrols. Through the massive viewports, the curve of Virel 9 hung suspended in the dark, a white marble swirled with storms. A reception committee was waiting. Director Hale, a human executive with a suit that cost more than Jace's entire outpost, stood flanked by two heavily armored alien guards. Beside him stood General Vrak, a vain military leader whose bioluminescent markings were scarred and faded with age. Welcome aboard, Hale said, his voice smooth and cold. I must admit, I am impressed. Most rats scurry into the dark when the lights come on. You three ran straight for the switch. Separate them, Vrak ordered, his voice a deep, resonant growl. Take the pilot to Sector 4. Put the highborns in the isolation wing. Level 5 containment. Jace lunged forward, straining against the guards holding his arms. We had a deal, Jace shouted. We surrender, you keep them together. We lied, Hale said simply. He nodded to the guards. A stun baton crackled against Jace's ribs, dropping him to his knees. His vision swam. Through the haze, he saw Nessa screaming his name as she was dragged away. He saw Lyra looking back at him, her eyes wide and desperate, before a blast door slammed shut, severing the line of sight. The interrogation room was sterile, white, and freezing. Jace sat alone at a metal table, his hands cuffed to the surface. The door slid open. Director Hale walked in, carrying a datapad and 2 glasses of amber liquid. He set one down in front of Jace. "Synth whiskey," Hale said, sitting opposite him. "Aged 12 years. It is better than that engine degreaser you drink on the surface." Jace stared at the glass. "I am not thirsty," Hale sighed, taking a sip of his own drink. "You are a practical man. Jace, I have seen your file. Dishonorable discharge, corporate security contractor. You know how the game is played. You know that sometimes collateral damage is just the cost of doing business." "We are not talking about collateral damage," Jace said, his voice rasping. "We are talking about starting a war to boost your stock prices." Hale shrugged. "War is the natural state of the galaxy. Peace is just the intermission. We are simply managing the schedule." He leaned forward, his tone shifting from casual to conspiratorial. "Here is the reality. Jace, the fleet is already mobilizing. The border colonies are already marked as targets. You cannot stop it, but you can survive it." Hale slid the datapad across the table. "New identity. Class A citizenship on a core world of your choice. A pension that will let you live like a king until you die of old age. All you have to do is give me the encryption sequence for the data core." Jace looked at the pad. It was everything he had wanted 3 years ago. An exit, a clean slate. "And the sisters?" Jace asked. "They are political liabilities," Hale said. "They will be handled according to Vane law. It will be quick, much quicker than freezing to death on an ice moon." Jace closed his eyes. He thought about the silence of his outpost. He thought about the peace of being nobody. Then he thought about the heat of the tarp. He thought about Lyra's hand in his, trembling as she confessed her guilt. He thought about Nessa's fierce golden eyes in the dark, demanding to be seen. They had broken him open. They had dragged him out of his cave and forced him to feel the cold again. And he realized, with a sudden sharp clarity, that he would rather freeze with them than be warm alone. Jace opened his eyes. He picked up the glass of whiskey. Hale smiled, expecting a toast. Jace threw the whiskey in Hale's face. "Go to hell," Jace said. Hale wiped his eyes, his face twisting into a snarl. He stood up, smoothing his suit. "I gave you a chance, pilot. Now we do it the hard way. In the isolation wing." Lyra sat in a chair designed to look comfortable but bolted to the floor. General Vrack paced in front of her. "You have disappointed me." "Lyra," Vrack said. His voice was heavy with paternal disappointment, a weapon he knew she had no defense against. "Your father expected strength. You have shown us only hysteria." "I have shown you truth," Lyra said, though her voice shook. "The treaty is a lie. You are selling our people to the humans for power. I am securing our future," Vrack roared, slamming his hand on the table. "The border worlds are weak. They drain our resources. By sacrificing them, we cement an alliance with synthetics that will make House Vane the dominant power in the sector for 1,000 years." He leaned down, his scarred face inches from hers. "But you have threatened that future. You have stolen state secrets and you have consorted with a human laborer. You have shamed your blood." Lyra looked down, her hands clenching in her lap. The shame was a physical weight, drilled into her since birth. "However," Vrack said, softening his tone, "there is a way to redeem yourself, a way to save the house, and to save Nessa." Lyra's head snapped up. "Nessa? She is young," Vrak said. She is impressionable. We can spin this. We can say she was coerced by a rogue sister. He placed a document on the table. Confess. Lyra. Admit that you acted alone, that you are a radical traitor working with human terrorists. Give us the codes. We will execute you. Yes, but Nessa will be spared. She will be stripped of rank, but she will live. Lyra stared at the document. It was a confession of treason. If I sign this, she whispered, you promise she lives. Vrak nodded. I give you my word as a general. Lyra reached for the stylus. Her hand trembled. She had spent her life protecting Nessa. This was just the final act of that duty. It was logical. It was necessary. She touched the tip of the stylus to the pad. 3 cells down. Nessa was pacing like a caged tiger. The isolation cell was soundproof and shielded, but it couldn't block everything. She felt the vibrations of the station, and she felt the echo of her sister's heart. She felt the crushing weight of Lyra's despair. She felt the cold, sharp resolve of martyrdom forming in Lyra's mind. She is going to do it, Nessa whispered to the empty room. She is going to give up. Fear spiked in her chest, not for herself, but for the stupidity of Lyra's sacrifice. Lyra was going to die for a lie, believing it would save Nessa, when Nessa knew Vrak would kill them both the moment the data was secured. No, Nessa hissed, not this time. She stopped pacing. She stood in the center of the room and closed her eyes. She reached for the well of energy inside her, the bioelectric potential that every vein possessed, usually reserved for intimate bonding or communication. She didn't try to communicate. She tried to scream. She pulled every ounce of fear, every spark of anger, every jagged edge of her love for Jace and Lyra, and she pushed it outward. She didn't aim it at a person. She aimed it at the station itself, the biotech sensors in the walls, designed to monitor prisoner health, suddenly spiked red. Nessa screamed, a silent, psychic shockwave that rattled her own teeth. In the security hub, the main board lit up like a Christmas tree. System failure in Sector 5, a technician yelled. Biofeedback loop detected. The sensors are overloading. What is causing it? The commander shouted. I do not know. It is reading as a cardiac event. For everyone. The system thinks every prisoner on the level is dying at once. Emergency protocols engaged. Releasing maglocks for medical access. The door to Jace's interrogation room hissed and clicked. The magnetic seal disengaged. Hale, who had been reaching for his stun baton, froze. Jace didn't hesitate. He launched himself across the table. He slammed his cuffed hands into Hale's jaw. Bone cracked. Hale went down. Jace scrambled over him, grabbing the key card from the executive's belt. He unlocked his cuffs in one fluid motion, grabbed the stun baton, and kicked the door open. The corridor was in chaos. Alarms were blaring, a deafening rhythmic klaxon. The lights were strobing violet and red. Jace sprinted toward the isolation wing. He knew that color. He knew that feeling in the air, like static electricity before a lightning strike. Nessa. He rounded the corner and nearly collided with a guard. Jace ducked a rifle swing, jammed the stun baton into the guard's knee, and shoved him into the wall. He reached cell 504. The door was half open. Nessa stumbled out. She looked drained, her skin pale, but her eyes were burning with a terrifying fire. Jace, she gasped, grabbing his arm. Lyra! We have to get to Lyra! Where is she? Jace asked, supporting her weight. Room 501, she is signing it. She is signing her life away. They ran. They burst into room 501 just as Lyra was pressing the stylus to the pad. Lyra, don't! Jace shouted. General Vrak spun around, reaching for his sidearm. Jace didn't stop running. He tackled the general, driving his shoulder into the alien's gut. They crashed into the wall. Vrak was stronger, but Jace was desperate. He jammed the stun baton into Vrak's neck. The general convulsed and slumped to the floor. Lyra stood frozen, the stylus in her hand. She looked at Jace, panting over the unconscious general. She looked at Nessa, standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. "You were going to do it," Nessa said, her voice shaking with rage. "You were going to leave me alone. I was saving you," Lyra whispered. "You were leaving me," Nessa screamed. She crossed the room and shoved Lyra, physically shoved her. "You do not get to decide that I survive alone. You do not get to make me the survivor of your tragedy." Lyra stumbled back, shock breaking through her stoicism. "I had to. It was the only way." "It is the coward's way," Nessa cried. "It is the easy way out. You die a hero, and I live with the guilt." "Stop it," Jace yelled. He stepped between them, breathing hard. He looked at Lyra. "We are not doing deals," he said fiercely. "We are not doing sacrifices. Hale offered me a way out too. I told him to go to hell." Lyra looked at him, her eyes widening. You refused?" "I am not leaving this station without both of you," Jace said. "And I am not leaving until every screen in the galaxy knows what these bastards did." He grabbed Lyra's shoulders. "Your duty isn't to die, Lyra. Your duty is to live and fix the mess your family made. That is harder. That is scarier. But that is what we are going to do." Lyra looked at the unconscious general, then at the confession on the table. She looked at Nessa, whose anger was dissolving into terrified relief. Lyra picked up the datapad. She snapped it over her knee. "The relay core," Lyra said, her voice hard and clear. "It is 3 decks up. If we can get to the central interface, we can override the hardline block." "We cannot send the data," Jace reminded her. "The encryption key is in my head, but we need the biosignature of a highborn to authorize a system-wide override." "You have 2 highborns," Nessa said, wiping her face, "and 1 very angry mechanic." The run to the relay core was a blur of violence. They moved as a unit, picking up weapons from fallen guards. Jace took point with a captured pulse rifle. Lyra covered the rear. Nessa hacked the door panels as they went, her fingers flying over the controls. They reached the core, a massive circular chamber filled with humming server towers and a central column of pulsing blue light that stretched from the floor to the ceiling. "This is it," Lyra said. "The nervous system of the sector." She ran to the main console. Nessa took the secondary terminal. "Jace, plug me in," Lyra ordered. Jace grabbed a data cable and jacked it into the port at the base of Lyra's skull, a standard interface for Vane pilots. He did the same for Nessa. The room shuddered. Intruder alert. The station AI droned. Security teams deployed to relay core. Lethal force authorized. "Hurry," Jace said, taking up a position behind a server rack, aiming his rifle at the blast doors. "I am inputting the encryption sequence manually," Lyra said, her eyes rolling back as she synced with the system. "Nessa, I need you to boost the signal. The firewall is adapting." "I am trying," Nessa gritted out. "It is heavy. It feels like swimming in tar." The blast doors hissed open. "Contact," Jace yelled. Mercenaries poured in, not the standard security. These were elite corporate shock troops. Jace opened fire. His rifle bucked against his shoulder. He dropped the first 2, but they were suppressed by heavy plasma fire. He ducked back as the server rack exploded in a shower of sparks. "Keep working," Jace shouted, firing blindly over the cover. On the console. Lyra and Nessa were shaking. Their skin was glowing blindingly bright. "It is not enough," Lyra gasped. "The signal. It needs more power. It needs a biometric spike. Something to break the dampeners. Use the bond," Nessa yelled. Lyra, stop fighting the system and just feel it. Feel what? Lyra cried. Feel us. Nessa screamed. She reached out across the console and grabbed Lyra's hand. The effect was instantaneous. The blue column of light in the center of the room turned a dazzling, violent violet. The station's lights blew out, replaced by the ethereal glow of the sisters' bioenergy. Jace felt the hair on his arm stand up. He fired, dropping another mercenary, but he was pinned. There were too many of them. Lyra squeezed Nessa's hand. She closed her eyes and stopped thinking about codes and protocols. She thought about the snow. She thought about Jace's hand on her frostbitten fingers. She thought about Nessa swimming through toxic coolant. She poured the love she had denied herself for 20 years into the machine. Nessa added her fire, her desperate need to belong, her ferocious adoration of the sister who had tried to cage her. And they both thought of Jace, the human who had stood between them in the dark. The energy spike hit the relay like a physical hammer. The central column roared. A shockwave of pure data blasted out of the station. On the screens above them, the progress bar slammed to 100%. Broadcast complete. We did it, Nessa cried, slumping against the console. Jace didn't have time to celebrate. A grenade landed near his feet. He kicked it away just as it detonated. The blast threw him backward, slamming him into the bulkhead. His rifle skittered away. A mercenary stepped over the debris, leveling his weapon at Lyra's head. No! Jace roared. He launched himself from the ground, tackling the mercenary. They rolled toward the edge of the platform. Below them, the maintenance shaft dropped into the void of the open superstructure. The mercenary kicked Jace off. He raised his rifle. Then the station shook violently. Retaliatory measures engaged. The AI announced, purging relay core, atmosphere venting in 5 seconds. Hail was blowing the room. If he couldn't stop the signal, he would kill the messengers. The outer wall of the chamber blasted outward. The silence of the vacuum rushed in. The air roared as it was sucked into space. Debris, server racks, and bodies were pulled toward the gaping hole in the hull. Jace grabbed a stanchion. The mercenary was sucked out screaming. Lyra and Nessa were holding onto the console, their magnetically locked boots keeping them grounded. Jace! Lyra screamed. Jace's grip was slipping. The wind was a physical titan, tearing at his fingers. A piece of wreckage slammed into his ribs, pinning his leg against the grating. He cried out, the sound lost in the roar. Lyra unlatched her boots. Lyra! No! Nessa grabbed her. Lyra broke free. She let the vacuum take her. She flew across the room, grabbing Jace's hand just as his fingers slipped from the stanchion. She slammed into the wall beside him, hooking her arm through a support beam. She looked at him. Her face was inches from his. The air was thin, freezing. Her eyes were terrified and beautiful. I love you, she yelled over the roar. Jace stared at her. I love you too. She looked past him. The emergency bulkhead seal was on the wall. It was manual. It was just out of reach. If she held onto Jace, she couldn't reach it. The air was running out. In 10 seconds, they would both pass out and be sucked into the dark. She looked at the button. She looked at Jace. She made the choice. Lyra let go of the beam. No! Jace screamed. The vacuum pulled her. She slid past him. She reached out and slammed her fist onto the emergency seal button. The blast doors slammed shut, sealing the breach, but Lyra was on the wrong side of the safety rail. The sudden pressure change pulled her toward the sealing door, threatening to crush her or drag her out before it closed. Nessa screamed. She didn't use her boots. She launched herself from the console, flying through the air. She grabbed Lyra's ankle just as Lyra was slipping toward the closing gap. Nessa slammed into the floor, her other hand grabbing Jace's boot where he was pinned. It was a chain of desperate survival. Jace pinned to the wall, Nessa holding Jace, Lyra holding on to life by Nessa's grip on her ankle. The door sealed with a thundering boom. Silence returned. The hiss of oxygen rushing back into the room was the sweetest sound Jace had ever heard. They lay there in a tangle of limbs and bruised metal. Jace gasped, pulling his leg free from the wreckage. He crawled toward them. Nessa pulled Lyra up. Lyra was shaking, gasping for air. They collapsed into a heap on the floor. Jace wrapped his arms around both of them. He buried his face in Lyra's neck, his hand gripping Nessa's shoulder so hard it would leave a bruise. "We are alive," Jace choked out. "We are alive." Lyra lifted her head. She looked at the main screen on the wall. It was showing a news feed from the core worlds. The headline was flashing in urgent yellow. "Breaking news. Synthetics conspiracy exposed, treaty fraud revealed. Fleets standing down." She looked at Jace. She looked at Nessa. "We won," she whispered, and then she started to cry. The recovery wing of Station Zenith 4 was a masterpiece of sterile tranquility. It orbited a lush, green agricultural world, and the view from the medical bay windows was a soothing expanse of turquoise oceans and emerald continents. It was the kind of view designed to lower blood pressure and make patients forget that the galaxy was a cold, violent place. Jace hated it. He lay in a biobed that hummed with a frequency he could feel in his teeth, staring at the ceiling. His body was a map of the last few weeks. There were fresh grafts of synthetic skin on his ribs where the debris had pinned him. His lungs, scarred by the vacuum exposure, were slowly regenerating under the influence of nanite therapy. But the real damage was in the quiet. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in the blizzard on Virel 9. He was freezing. He was holding 2 dying women in the dark, or he was back on the Helios station, watching Lyra's fingers slip from the stanchion, watching the air turn into a roaring monster that wanted to swallow them whole. He would wake up gasping, his heart rate spiking the monitors, his hands clutching the sheets. And every time he woke up, he was not alone. On the bad days, it was Lyra. She would be sitting in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, her posture perfect, a datapad balanced on her knee. She wore civilian clothes now, simple tunics of gray or white, but she wore them like armor. When she saw him wake, she would not say anything immediately. She would just reach out and place her cool, silver hand on his wrist, her thumb brushing over his pulse point until his heart slowed down to match the rhythm of her own breathing. On the better days, it was Nessa. She did not sit. She sprawled. She would have her boots up on the end of his bed, peeling a piece of exotic fruit or complaining about the station's entertainment selection. Jace opened his eyes on a Tuesday morning to find Nessa holding court. She was not alone. 2 young nurses were checking the drip feeds, and Nessa was leaning back in her chair, gesturing with a half-eaten protein bar. "So there we were," Nessa said, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper, trapped in a tin can buried in the ice. The temperature was -60. The wind was howling like a banshee. And this human... She pointed a thumb at Jace. "This stubborn, foolish, wonderful human decides that the best way to keep us alive is to become a personal heater." The nurses giggled. Jace groaned, pulling the pillow over his face. "Nessa, please," he muffled. "He saved 2 alien sisters from freezing to death," Nessa announced, ignoring him completely. "And now, according to the laws of narrative causality and high drama, we are contractually obligated to fight for his heart." One of the nurses looked at Jace with wide eyes. "Is that true?" Jace lowered the pillow. His face was burning. "No, that is not. It is not a contract. It was a survival situation." Nessa winked at the nurse. "He is very modest. It is part of the charm." But you should have seen the tension in the maintenance tunnels. The air was practically sparking. The door to the room slid open. Lyra walked in. She carried a stack of physical flimsies, official tribunal documents, and looked like she had just come from a war council. She stopped, looking at the giggling nurses, the flushed Jace, and the grinning Nessa. "Are you retelling the story again?" Lyra asked, her voice dry. "I am refining the oral history," Nessa corrected, popping the last of the protein bar into her mouth. "The public deserves to know the truth. The truth involves significantly more panic and significantly less romance," Lyra said, dismissing the nurses with a polite nod. When they were alone, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't heavy, exactly, but it was charged. The three of them were a triad formed in disaster, and now that the disaster was over, they were trying to figure out how to be people again. "How are the hearings?" Jace asked, sitting up. Lyra set the papers down on the side table. "Complicated. Synthetics is in damage control mode. They have fired the entire board of directors and are blaming the conspiracy on rogue executives. Hale is in custody, but he is negotiating a plea deal." "And General Vrack?" Jace asked. Lyra's expression darkened. "My uncle has been stripped of his rank. He is under house arrest on the Vane homeworld. The house is in turmoil." She walked to the window, looking down at the green planet below. "Half the council wants me tried for treason for exposing the treaty. The other half wants to give me a medal because the public is calling us heroes. My name is mud in the high courts. Jace, I have burned bridges that stood for 500 years. "Does it bother you?" Jace asked softly. Lyra touched the glass. "No, for the first time in my life. I do not care what the council thinks. I only care that the fleets have stood down." Nessa jumped off the bed and walked over to her sister. She bumped her shoulder against Lyra's. "You are a revolutionary, sister. It suits you. You look less like a statue and more like a person who might actually start a riot." "I do not want to start a riot." Lyra sighed, though she leaned into the contact. "I just want to rest." Rest was a relative term. 2 weeks later, Jace was discharged. He walked with a slight limp. The graft on his leg was still knitting, but he was free of the machines. They met in the station's arboretum. It was a massive geodesic dome at the top of the station, filled with genetically sculpted flora from a dozen worlds. There were trees with leaves like purple glass and flowers that sang soft. Melodic notes when the wind blew. It was night cycle on the station. The dome was lit by artificial starlight and a simulation of the aurora borealis, a soft, rippling curtain of green and gold that reminded them all, painfully and beautifully, of Virel 9. They found a quiet bench overlooking a small pond. Jace sat in the middle, Lyra on his right, Nessa on his left. It was the same arrangement they had fallen into on the outpost floor, but now there was space between them. The silence stretched out, but this time, it wasn't awkward. It was the silence of people who knew each other's heartbeats. "So," Nessa said, kicking her boots against the gravel path, "we are safe. The data is out. The war is paused. Jace is walking." She looked up at the artificial stars. "We made a pact," she said quietly. "No decisions until we were free." Jace looked at his hands. He took a breath, the scent of jasmine and damp earth filling his lungs. "We did," he said. He turned to look at Lyra. She was watching him, her violet eyes unguarded. The bioluminescent markings on her neck were glowing with a steady, warm light. Then he looked at Nessa. She was watching him too, her expression fierce and vulnerable, waiting for the blow she expected to come. "I fell in love with you," Lyra said. She spoke clearly, without hesitation. I fell in love with you because you looked at me and you did not see the heir. You did not see the diplomat. You saw a woman who was terrified of her own shadow, and you did not turn away. You touched my hands when they were frozen, and you made me feel like I was worth saving, not because of my rank, but just because I was Lyra. She reached out and took Jace's hand. I have spent my life wearing a mask, Jace. You were the first person to ask me to take it off. Jace squeezed her hand. His throat felt tight. Then Nessa spoke. Her voice was lower, rougher. I thought I was just rebelling, she admitted. I thought, oh, here is a handsome human pilot. This will annoy Father. This will shock Lyra. It was a game. She looked at Jace, her eyes shimmering. But then you stopped me. In the crawler, in the tunnels. You did not let me use you. You respected me enough to tell me no. You treated me like an equal. Jace, not a child, not a spare. You saw my fire and you did not try to put it out. She laughed, a short, wet sound. And that is infinitely more dangerous than just thinking you are cute. I love you because you made me feel powerful. Jace looked at both of them. He felt the weight of their confessions, the absolute miracle that these two incredible beings had carved a space for him in their lives. I love you both, Jace said. The truth of it rang in the quiet garden. I love the way you fight, Nessa. I love how you burn. And Lyra, I love your strength. I love the quiet way you hold the world together. He looked out at the water. When we were in the tunnels, when we were connected, it was the first time in 5 years I felt like I belonged somewhere. I wanted to keep that. I wanted to be greedy. He turned to them. But I refused to choose then because I knew that if I picked one of you out of fear or out of lust, I would break the bond between you. And that bond, that sisterhood, is more important than I am. Lyra looked at Nessa. Nessa looked at Lyra. A silent communication passed between them, a recognition of the cliff edge they had walked, and the fact that Jace had pulled them back. We cannot go back to how it was, Lyra said. We cannot have secrets. We cannot sacrifice ourselves in silence to protect the other. No more martyrdom, Nessa agreed. And no more treating love like a limited resource. It is not a pie. We do not run out. But, Nessa added, her voice trembling slightly, we also have to be honest about what we want. She looked at Jace, then at Lyra. She saw the way their hands were clasped. She saw the gravity that pulled them toward each other, a gravity that was steady, deep, and settled. You two make sense, Nessa said softly. Lyra looked at her sister, alarm flashing in her eyes. Nessa! No, listen, Nessa said, holding up a hand. It is okay. You two, you balance. You are both carrying so much guilt. You are both so serious. You need each other to heal. And you? Jace asked. I need to run, Nessa said, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. I have spent my whole life in Lyra's shadow. If I stay, if I try to be the third point in this triangle, I will always be the little sister. I will always be the alternative. She stood up, brushing the gravel from her trousers. I deserve to be someone's first choice, Jace. And I think I need to go find out who I am when I am not just Lyra's sister or Jace's rescue. Lyra stood up. She reached for Nessa, but Nessa stepped back, shaking her head. Do not try to fix this, Lyra. It is not broken, it is just growing. Nessa looked at Jace. She leaned down and kissed him on the cheek. It was a soft, lingering touch. You saved my life. Jace, you gave me back to myself. I will never forget that. She straightened up and looked at them both with a bright, tear teary grin. Besides, someone has to go to the border worlds and make sure the new council does not mess up the reconstruction. I have a ship to catch. Nessa. Lyra started, tears spilling over. I love you, Nessa said. Go be happy. Let yourself be happy. Lyra, for once, she turned and walked away down the garden path, her head high, her stride long and confident. She did not look back. Jace and Lyra stood in the silence she left behind. The ache of her absence was sharp, but it was a clean pain, the pain of a bone set right so it could heal. Jace turned to Lyra. She was trembling. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands. Her skin was warm, the bioluminescence pulsing a soft, steady rhythm against his palms. She looked up at him. The fear was gone. The mask was gone. There was only Lyra. Jace, she whispered. He lowered his head. The kiss was not like the desperate, adrenaline-fueled moments in the snow. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was a question asked and answered in the language of breath and touch. His lips met hers, and the world narrowed down to the point of contact. He felt the tension leave her body. He felt her surrender to the moment, trusting him to hold her. It was a kiss that tasted of survival, of grief, and of a hope that was terrifyingly bright. Above them, the artificial aurora swirled in bands of violet and green, witnessing the start of something new. 6 months later, the ice of Virel 9 was exactly as Jace remembered it, white, blinding, and endless. The wind still howled, but inside the outpost, the sound was different. It was no longer a threat. It was just the weather. Jace stood outside the airlock, wearing his old thermal suit. He was welding a new sensor array onto the roof of the main habitation module. The outpost had changed. The blast marks were gone. The interior, once a grease-stained cave of solitude, had been expanded. There was a second bunk. There were rugs from the Vane homeworld on the floor. There was a small hydroponic garden in the corner where Lyra was attempting to grow coffee. It wasn't a hiding place anymore. It was a waypoint, a sanctuary for pilots flying the dangerous border routes. Jace finished the weld and flipped his visor up. The comms unit on his belt crackled. Approach vector confirmed. Lyra's voice came through, clear and warm. She is here. Jace climbed down the ladder and walked to the landing pad. Lyra was waiting there. She wore a heavy fur-lined coat over her mechanic's coveralls. She looked different. Her hair was cut shorter, practical, and her skin glowed with health. She didn't look like a high-born exile. She looked like a woman who knew exactly where she belonged. She slipped her arm through Jace's as they watched the ship descend. It was a sleek, fast courier vessel, painted in the vibrant colors of the free colonies. It touched down in a cloud of steam and snow. The ramp lowered. Nessa walked down. She looked older, tougher. There was a blaster strapped to her hip and a scar on her chin that hadn't been there before, but her smile was the same, wicked and bright. She stopped at the bottom of the ramp, hands on her hips, looking at the two of them. Well, she shouted over the wind, you two are still standing. I owe Rix 20 credits. I bet him you would have driven each other crazy by now. Nessa. Lyra broke from Jace's arm and ran. She collided with her sister halfway across the pad. It wasn't the polite embrace of courtiers. It was a fierce, crushing hug. Nessa lifted Lyra off her feet, spinning her around. I missed you. Nessa laughed, setting her down. You look terrible. Too happy. It is disgusting. Jace walked up, smiling. Welcome home. Troublemaker, he said. Nessa pulled him into the hug, sandwiching him between them. The contact was familiar, electric, but without the confusing pull of the past. It was just love, pure and simple. She pulled back, looking him up and down. You are looking good. Jace, the scars suit you, makes you look mysterious. She glanced at Lyra, then back at him with a mischievous glint in her eye. Just remember, human. I am only here for a refueling stop. I have a meeting with a mining guild in the Theta sector, but... She leaned in, tapping his chest. If she ever breaks your heart, or if you ever break hers, I will come back, and I will reclaim my rightful prize. Lyra laughed, a sound that was rare and beautiful in the cold air. You can try, sister, Lyra retorted, grabbing Jace's hand and interlacing their fingers. But he is under new management, and the security protocols are very strict. Nessa threw her head back and laughed. The sound echoed off the mountains brighter than the storm. Come on, she said, linking arms with both of them. I brought real food, and I have stories. You are not going to believe what happened on Othris Prime. They walked back toward the outpost, the three of them huddled together against the cold. As they reached the airlock, Jace paused. He looked up at the sky. The storm was breaking. Through the clouds, the real Aurora Borealis was emerging, a river of violet and gold flowing through the stars. He looked at the two women beside him. Lyra, the anchor who had learned to float. Nessa, the fire who had learned to guide instead of burn. He thought about the man he had been 6 months ago, a ghost haunting his own life, hiding from his guilt in the roar of the wind. He had gone out into the storm to save two strangers because he didn't care if he lived or died. But they had saved him back. They had dragged him into the light. They had forced him to feel, to fight, to choose. They had broken his heart open so it could be reset properly. The miracle wasn't the crash. It wasn't the survival. The miracle was that they had all refused to let the cold win. They had refused to live half-lives. Jace, Lyra called from the open door. Her hand was glowing where it rested on the frame, a beacon in the gray. Are you coming? Jace smiled. He took a deep breath of the freezing, clean air. I am coming, he said. He stepped inside, and the door sealed shut, locking the warmth in.